Well, today we're going to be diving into Romans chapter 1, verses 8 through 17. We are still in the introduction of Paul's letter to the church in Rome. We're still going over the basics, the introductions of who is writing this and who am I writing to and what are my goals, what are my thoughts. We're still getting that in this introduction in chapter 1. And so we're going to pick up in verse 8, go through verse 17. We're going to read down through all the verses, and then we'll go back and we'll start picking them apart to understand them deeper. So Romans chapter 1, verses 8 through 17. Get your translations out. Doesn't matter what translation you have. All are welcome here. And we're going to go ahead and read down through it, and then we'll study it together. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness. How can I constantly remember you in my prayers at all times? And I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I've had among the other Gentiles. I am obligated to both Greeks and to non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Thanks be to God for the reading of this word. As we take a look at these passages in this introduction, still in the introduction of Paul's letter to the church in Rome, we need to understand a concept that's going to be running not only through this introduction, but also throughout all of this letter. And that is this notion of faith is a gift of God. The faith that you and I experience is a gift of God. Even the concept or the ability to have faith is a gift of God. And so when we take a look at this gift of God, we've got to start to unpack that and understand that a little bit deeper. Faith is a gift of God, just like we have many gifts. We have gifts of our time, we have gifts of our talents, we have gifts of our treasures. We have many different things that are gifts from God. But the thing is that we have to understand is that a gift never used or a gift never shared or a gift never experienced is a gift never truly received. So faith is a gift of God, but so is the air, but you have to breathe it. So is bread, but you have to eat it. And so is water, but you have to drink it. So there's this responsibility that we have in our relationship with Jesus Christ. There's a responsibility that we have in our relationship with God, that faith isn't something that just happens to us. Faith is something that grows up out of us. It's a gift that has been given to us, and we must live in response to it. And when you get right down to it, each and every single one of us, every single day, knows what it's like to live as a person of faith. Even if you're watching today, if you're tuning in right now and you don't have a faith in Jesus, you have a faith in something, because as human beings being designed in the likeness of God, we have the ability to have faith. Not only the ability to have faith, but also too, we're designed to live in faith. Simple explanation of this, or an example of this. When you went to bed last night, did you set an alarm for this morning? If you answered yes because you had someplace to be or you had something to do, you had to get to work or you had a doctor's appointment or something like that, if you said yes, then when you set that alarm the night before you were supposed to get up, you had faith that you would be alive to turn that alarm off and make it to your appointment. That's an act of faith. Human beings operate out of faith. And that makes us different than other creatures like animals. Think about it for a while. Squirrels don't have faith. Squirrels don't need to bother with faith. Basically, a squirrel gets up in the morning and deals with survival, eating, and reproducing. That's about it. Us humans, because we're created in the image of God, we have been given this gift of faith. But just like the air, the bread, and the water, if we don't breathe it, eat it, or drink it, then it does us no good. It merely sits over there and we perish in its presence. And it's the same way in our relationship with Jesus. Our faith has been a gift from God, but we've got to access it. We've got to do something about it. And this is going to run, this is going to run through all of Paul's letter to the church in Rome, but we're definitely going to be talking about it today as we take a look at these passages. So let's take a look at verses 8 through 10. 8 through 10 says this: "First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. God, whom I serve in my spirit in preaching the gospel of his Son, is my witness, how constantly I remember you in my prayers at all times, and I pray that now at last, by God's will, the way may be open for me to come to you." So these few verses here, we're going to look at the beginning of our passage for today. And we're going to understand this concept of prayer. Prayer is essential to Paul's ministry. We see this over and over again in Paul's letter, that he's constantly praying for the churches, praying for the people, praying for specific individuals. And it's a reminder for us at the beginning of this letter that prayer is just as needed in ministry as preaching or teaching. And it's important for us to remember that, sometimes when it comes to doing church or it comes to other activities, we focus in on the things that we can physically see results. When you preach, you can see the results. You can see the response in people's faces. You can have conversations after the message is over. Teaching, it's the same way. You can see those aha moments in people's eyes when there's teaching going on. You can have progress being able to be seen, whether it's giving a test or some other kind of examination. You can see progress. Prayer is different because you don't always see the progress for it. Many times prayer happens in private, it happens in secret. And so it's not something that we go out and say, hey, I prayed 2 times today. We might say I taught 2 classes today, or we might say I preached a message today, but we don't have this public aspect of prayer. But Paul puts it right at the forefront here in verses 8 and 10 of chapter 1. And he's basically showing us or reminding us how important prayer is. It's just as needed. So wherever you are in your life, make sure you're including prayer in whatever it is that you're doing and how you're living. However that prayer looks. Maybe you don't have a formulated prayer life right now, and so just starting to maybe say a word of prayer sometime during the day would be a really good start. Whatever you need to do, take a step, try something different. I was once talking to a doctor about my diet, and I really like sweets, I really like sugar. And so my doctor was talking to me about how, now that you're getting older, and I have heart problems. I don't have heart problems anymore, but I did have heart problems at that time. He said, you might want to take a look at your diet. He said, like when you go home and you stop by the convenience store to get gas, and he says, you usually go in and you buy a Snickers. He said, try this week one day not to go in and buy that Snickers bar. Don't do it every day, but one day. At the end of the week, you'll be better off than you were at the beginning. And then the next week, you can try 2 days, and so on and so on. And the problem is that many times when it comes to prayer, or it comes to dieting, or it comes to anything in our life, we dive right in and we try to change everything from the ground up immediately. And that is a recipe for disaster. And so today, wherever you find yourself in relationship to the concept of prayer, try something new today. If you never pray, maybe say a prayer tonight before you go to bed. If you pray all the time, then take a look at how you pray and maybe try a different form or a different place, or praying in a different style. Doing something different so you don't get caught in a rut. Doing something different so that you can grow and expand. But he's saying at the beginning here in verses 8 through 10 that prayer is just as needed in ministry as preaching and teaching. And that's something that we've got to remember in the church, and that's something that we've got to remember in our lives. So let's take a look at verses 11 through 13. I long to see you, so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. So we take a look at these verses. He moves from this concept of prayer into really an explanation he moves into not only an explanation of his desire and how he has desired to be with them in the past, but he hasn't been able to, but it's also his desire to, in the future, be with them. And the desire is rooted out of nothing more than he wants them to grow in their faith. He wants them to learn and to grow. And so as we take a look at these verses, we take a look at this concept of geese flying in a V, and we ask the question, why do geese fly in a V? That was a question I had as I was studying this, because as I was reading one of the commentators made a reference to geese flying in a V. And so I said, I'm going to do a little research about why geese fly in a V. And I found out that geese fly in a V because it's aerodynamically the most logical way to fly. For the bird that's in the front of the V is pulling the majority of the weight. The birds behind the front bird in the V are kind of gliding along the uplift of the air that the first bird is creating. So if you ever get an opportunity to watch geese flying in a V and you can follow them for a while, you'll notice that every now and then that bird that's at the point will drop out and go to the back, and a new bird will take the point, because that bird that's been in front is pulling all the weight and gets tired. So when the bird flies to the back, he or she gets to rest and to kind of like float on the other bird's efforts, on the other currents. And so geese fly in a V because it makes it easier for them all to fly in a direction for a much longer time, so they don't get worn out. If they all flew at their own pace and their own place, then they would have to stop more and rest more. But the V is aerodynamic, and it helps them to go further as a group. And that's going to be essential as we take a look at these verses 11 through 13. Because when we take a look at it, we take a look at this notion of what Paul desires. Paul desires to be with the church in Rome so that they can grow. Let's listen to his words again. I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift and make you strong. I want to fly at the point of the V for a little while with you. I haven't been able to be a part of that V with you as you've been flying, you've been journeying in life, but I want to take that point for a little while, and I want to give you an opportunity to learn and grow. Verse 12, that is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. Remember, when the geese are flying in the V, the one at the point is pulling the lion's share of the weight, but eventually that one will drop in the back and another one will take over, and then this one who just was at the point pulling all the weight is now able to cruise a little bit and to rest. And so everybody's working together for the good of the group. And that's what Paul is saying to the church in Rome. I want to work with you. I want to take the point with you so that we can all work for the good of each one of us. Again, as it says in verse 12, he says, that is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. So what is good for the group is good for the individual. What's good for the individual is good for the group. And that's the focus of what Paul is talking about. So in verse 13, I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among other Gentiles. And so this notion that we're looking at now is this understanding of Paul's desire, Paul's wish. Paul has desired to be with the church in Rome. Paul has desired to visit the church in Rome. Remember, we said earlier that Paul has this notion and this idea that he wants to have a ministry into Spain. And he thinks that Rome would be a perfect home base for him to launch that ministry. So he wants to come to Rome and he wants to have a connection with them. He wants to build a relationship with them. But the thing that we understand as we read Paul's words is that what we desire and what God has planned are sometimes different. And when that happens, we must err on the side of God. And we must understand that there's been reasons for it, and there must be a reason why this is not happening yet. But I will still share my desire. I will still share my desire to be in Rome, even though God hasn't opened that door for it to happen yet. That desire is still there. And you and I understand what that's like. We understand what it's like to have a desire to do something, a desire to be something, a desire to accomplish something. But it seems like roadblock after roadblock after roadblock comes in the way. Well, we can either rage against the machine and fight all those roadblocks and take it on ourselves, or we can sit back and say, maybe God has another route for me. Maybe God has another plan for me. Not that I abandon or let go of what I desire, but also, too, I submit what I've planned or what I've desired to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. And I lay it at his feet and say, if it is your will, let it be done. But not my will, but your will be done. And so this notion of what Paul is sharing is that he's saying to them, I really want to be with you, but for some reason, multiple reasons, I haven't been able to be with you. And so it's important for us to understand that even though he desires to be that point geese in that V, that point goose in the V, he hasn't been able to do that for them because God has not made the way clear. And Paul is okay with that. It's not what he would like to do, but also, too, he is big enough, he's man enough to surrender his will to God's will. And that's an important lesson for me and you, because many times we will rage against the machine and we will fight God tooth and nail to try to get what we want because we believe what we want is good and best for us. When the truth is, God knows what is good and what is best for us, and we need to follow him. Not that we don't share our desires, not that we don't share what we desire to do or who we desire to be, but we also then surrender that, lay that at his feet, and allow him to move. So let's take a look at verses 14 and 15. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. Now, first, before we go any further, sometimes you read something multiple times and you don't pick something up until you've read it multiple times. And this just popped into my mind as I was reading it, and I have read this passage several times, studying for it and preparing for this study. But this almost kind of sounds a little sarcastic, doesn't it? Listen to it now. Think of it from a sarcastic point of view, a sarcastic sense of humor point of view. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I'm so eager to preach the gospel to you. So it's just a little aside, but I can just hear a little bit of sarcasm in there. I don't think that's what Paul intended, but we can understand how that can be interpreted that way. So let's go back and take a look at a very important word in this, and that is obligated. In verse 14, Paul says, I am obligated. So let's get a sense of this concept of obligation. So being obligated means bound or compelled legally or morally. Bound or compelled legally or morally to do something, to be something, to take some action. So Paul is saying that I am bound or compelled legally or morally, both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish, period. So the sarcasm ends because there's a break between verse 14 and verse 15. Verse 15 is not referring to the foolish that he said in verse 14. He's merely saying about the wise and the foolish, the Greeks and the non-Greeks in relation to his obligated that he is in verse 14. So that takes away the sarcasm from this passage in Romans, because he's obligated, he's bound or compelled legally or morally to these people, to Greeks and non-Greeks, to the wise as well as to the foolish. And so that's important for us to understand that he's doing this not because he wants to get something. Yes, is there going to be a benefit for Paul if he can make a relationship with the Romans and he can use it as his home base to launch off into Spain? Of course. There's always mutual benefits in the relationships that we have. The question is, do we go into those relationships seeking those benefits, or do we go into the relationships because we're obligated to the relationships? Totally different structure, totally different foundation. And here, Paul wants to make it very clear to the church in Rome that he's not doing this because he wants a home base to launch off into Spain. Yes, that would be a benefit. That would be icing on the cake. But the cake is actually the obligation that he has. He's bound or compelled morally or legally to Greeks and non-Greeks, to the wise and to the foolish. And so he is bound, he's obligated to be in this relationship. And that's his foundation for his relationship with them, not to get the benefits. The benefits will be great, but first and foremost, this is this obligation. And he's obligated to do this to Jesus. He's obligated to do this to God, because that's who his obligation rests. His obligation doesn't rest to the Romans. His obligation doesn't rest to the Corinthians or the Ephesians or the Colossians. His obligation rests in God. His obligation rests in Jesus. And so he's serving. Remember, he said earlier in chapter 1 that he is a bond servant, a slave of Jesus Christ. And so this is his obligation. So if we put a period at the end of verse 14, then we get rid of the sarcasm that I picked up when I was just reading that. And so he says, that is why in verse 15, that I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. So he's eager to preach the gospel to them in Rome because there'll be Greeks and non-Greeks, there'll be wise and there'll be foolish. But also he's eager because the thing we have to understand is Rome is the big stage. This is the capital of the Roman Empire. This is the big stage. This is not that Thessalonica is not important, not that Galatia is not important, not that Corinth is not important. All of them are important, but when you think about it, in the scheme of things in the world in that day, if you can make it in Rome, you can make it anywhere. Rome is the big stage, and so it's important for him to have a stronghold there. It's important for him to have an influence there. If he's going to be obligated to Greeks and non-Greeks, wise and foolish, then he better be involved in Rome, because that's the center of it all. So that's important for us to understand too. Again, removing the sarcasm that I brought up earlier. So let's look at verses 16 and 17. Here's where we really get into the meat. Here's where we really get into the wet cement that's going to harden as a foundation for this whole letter, and basically the foundation for Paul's ministry. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So when we take a look at these last few verses, we see the theme of the entire letter. If you want to sum up what Romans is all about, if you want to check out now and do not attend any more of these Bible studies on Romans, then memorize and study verses 16 and 17, because this is the theme of the entire letter. The next 16 chapters are all going to be in support of this theme. That theme of, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentiles. For in the gospel the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. This is the theme, that's righteous will live by faith. The theme of Paul's ministry, the theme of the book of Romans, the theme of our walk, our journey as followers of Jesus Christ is this concept of the faith is the important thing. As we talked about in the beginning, faith is a gift, but we've got to access it. We got to do something about it. And so this is where Paul is going to really kind of hammer that home and lay it down. That notion of tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them. This is what we're going to see in Romans. When it comes to faith, that faith is the way. He's going to tell them that faith is the way, then he's going to tell them about how faith is the way, and then he's going to remind them that faith is the way as we go through the book of Romans. First thing we got to take a look at in these passages is we got to remind ourselves of this concept of gospel. Remember, gospel is the Greek word for good news. So what is the gospel according to Paul? And so if you go back to verses 2, 3, and 4 in chapter 1, will remind you of the gospel according to Paul. You ready? Turn back to chapter 1, verses 2, 3, and 4. Do you have it? Okay, look at it. The gospel he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures regarding his Son, who as to his earthly life was descendant of David, and who through the Spirit of holiness was appointed the Son of God in power by his resurrection from the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. And so the good news of God, the good news that Paul is talking about here in verse 17, for in the gospel the righteousness of God. So this gospel, this good news is Jesus Christ. That's the good news. And so he's going to continue to come back to this concept in this letter. And so at the beginning, he's just reminding them, this is what I'm going to tell you about. And then he's going to tell them about it. And then he's going to say, this is what I told you about. And so this gospel notion, remember, anytime you come across gospel in Paul's letters, you've got to remember, what is he talking about? He's talking about the good news of Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, both Son of Man and Son of God, both Son of David and Son of God. The Messiah, the chosen one, whatever label you got to put on, that's the good news that he's talking about. So as we take a look at this concept of the good news, we understand that faith in Jesus is not the cause of salvation. Because remember, we said at the beginning, faith is no good unless you access it. Faith is a gift, but unless you use it, it's no good. Just like water is a gift, but if you don't drink it, it's no good. Bread's a gift, but if you don't eat it, it's no good. Air is a gift, but if you don't breathe it, it's no good. Faith is a gift. But the thing that we have to understand, that faith in Jesus is not the cause of our salvation. That's not faith that Paul is talking about. So we need to dig into that deeper. Think about that one for a second, that faith in Jesus is not the cause of salvation. Let's go back to verses 16 and 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, Jesus Christ, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteousness will live by faith. And so what we take a look here is this concept of, in verse 16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation. So you might say, well, that means that faith brings the salvation. Well, can something be brought that didn't already exist? No, it can't. I can't bring you something that doesn't first exist. It must first exist before me to bring it to you. So in order for God to bring salvation to everyone who believes, that salvation must first exist. First to the Jew and then to the Gentile. Then verse 17, for in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. Look at your translations. Do you have that? The righteousness of God is revealed. Can something be revealed that doesn't exist? Of course not. A revealing is not a creation. A revealing is merely coming to someone's attention. Revealing is the removal of the curtain so that you can actually see it. You know, what's behind curtain number 1? That's revealing. Revealing is not creation. Creation is something different. And so when we take a look at this concept and we take a look at these verses, we need to dig deep into this very foundational belief and this understanding that faith in Jesus is not the cause of salvation. It is merely the thing that opens up the possibility of salvation that already exists. It is the river that salvation is the river that's flowing by, and faith is jumping into that river. The river already exists. The salvation is already there. Faith is what accesses that salvation for us. It's not the thing that brings us salvation. It's the thing that accesses the salvation that God has already given. So let's unpack that one for a little while. And let's start first with this word righteousness. Righteousness is important because it says in verse 17, for in the gospel, the righteousness of God. And righteousness is one of those churchy words we throw around a lot, don't we? Oh, they're so righteous, or let's be righteous. You know, what does this mean? What is righteousness? Righteousness is the quality or state of being just or rightful. The quality or state of being just or rightful. This is righteousness. Now, the thing that's interesting about this concept of righteousness, can you determine righteousness for yourself? No, you cannot. You can believe you're righteous, but only from without you can it be determined how you're righteous. So there has to be someone, something that determines what righteousness is, and then they've got to make a judgment saying whether you're righteous or not. If you walk around saying, I am righteous, then that puts you in a totally different category, and that makes you self-righteous. And that's a totally different place. And unfortunately, many of our brothers and sisters in Jesus have interpreted these passages to say just that I need to walk around saying I'm all that in a bag of chips. I need to walk around saying I am righteous. Well, that's not for us to say because we don't have the ability to determine righteousness for ourselves. Righteousness can only come from without. That can only come from somewhere else. In this context, what we're talking about today, Paul is saying that righteousness comes from where? Comes from God. Look at the verse. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God. The righteousness of God. It's not the righteousness of me. It's not the righteousness of you. It's not the righteousness of humans, because it can't be. It's got to come from without us. And so this righteousness is something, this quality or state of being just or rightful is not something that we determine. That would make us self-righteous. This is something that God determines. So if God determines whether we're righteous or not, then we can honestly say that we are doomed. But we're not. Because what's the gospel? Jesus. What's gospel? Good news. The good news is Jesus. So in Jesus, righteousness is revealed. In Jesus, righteousness is revealed. We have no ability to be righteous on our own. So God has given us the gift. Remember the beginning, we said a gift is no good unless it's accessed, unless it's used, unless it's opened, unless it's drank, unless it's eaten, unless it's breathed in. So in Jesus, the righteousness is revealed. So God knows that we can't be righteous on our own, so he has given us Jesus. So in Jesus, righteousness can be revealed. The righteousness of God can be revealed. So faith is what we have in Jesus, so that we can access the righteousness of God that is revealed. So faith is what? Faith is confidence or trust in a person or thing. So we have faith, confidence or trust in a person or thing. We have faith in Jesus, confidence and trust in Jesus. And so our confidence and trust in Jesus opens the door to righteousness that we can't achieve on our own so that we can be in a right relationship with God. And this is what Paul is saying. Not self-righteousness, not saying I'm all that in a bag of chips, not saying that I do everything perfectly, but saying I lean into the righteousness that comes from God. And I lean into that righteousness that comes from God through faith. I jump into the river of righteousness that comes by faith in Jesus. And so this is something that happens without us. So we have to participate in it. It is a gift. Faith is a gift that has been given to us by God. But if we don't eat it, if we don't breathe it, if we don't drink it, then it does us no good. And so basically what we see in verses 16 and 17, the theme, the foundation of the book of Romans that we're going to be seeing over and over again is this. The message of salvation is Jesus. The quality or state of being just or rightful is revealed through confidence or trust in Jesus. That's the message of salvation using the definitions of righteousness, the definitions of faith. This is what salvation is. This is the good news. The good news is that in Jesus, the quality or state of being just or rightful is revealed. It's not created, it's revealed through confidence and trust or trust in Jesus. So basically what this is saying is that this is justification by faith. So I'm saved by grace through faith in Jesus. My salvation is not created because of my faith in Jesus. My salvation is lived, it's experienced, it's grabbed a hold of, it's opened up because of my faith in Jesus. The salvation has already been given. God has already taken care of that. Since the beginning of time, our salvation is a done deal. But the way that we can access that salvation is through faith in Jesus. And that's what's important for us to understand. Not that our faith in Jesus creates salvation, but the faith in Jesus reveals the salvation that has already existed. We just couldn't experience it because we never had the ability to open it, for we cannot be righteous on our own. That's a whole lot to take in over those verses. But it's important for you to soak on that for a little while, because we're going to revisit this over and over again in this letter to Romans. In fact, anytime you read Paul, you're going to revisit this over and over again. And it's important for us to understand this concept of justification by faith. We're not salvation by faith. It's justification by faith. We are saved by grace through faith in Jesus. The grace of God has already been given. The way we access that grace, that salvation, is through faith in Jesus. The faith doesn't save us. The salvation's already there. Basically the faith just justifies the salvation that comes to us. And so this is the process that we're going to go through in this letter. And so I invite you to spend some time to soak on that this week. Share it with other people. Have conversations about this. This is wonderful coffee conversation, even if you have to do the coffee conversation by Zoom. It's a wonderful way to talk about this concept of faith, because many times we miss this point. And then our faith becomes all about works. Then our faith becomes all about how good we can be. And Paul wants to say it right at the very beginning, the understanding that this has nothing to do with how good we are. It has everything to do with how good Jesus is. So until next week, we go off into this world and we celebrate a week closer to Christmas. Next week will be our last Bible study before our Christmas and New Year's break. We're going to take a couple of weeks off, and then we'll pick it back up in the new year. But join us next week, and if you have somebody in your life that would benefit from this study, please invite them, share with them this study, because this study is no good unless people learn from it, unless people glean from it. So until then, stay safe and stay sane.